Welcome to the Right Now Show. I'm Judy Saxon.
And I'm Charlie Redner, and this is the show where we put the focus on writers, writing, and the arts. Hi, Judy.
Well, hi, Charlie. What's happening to the busiest guy in Laguna Woods Village?
Well, I'm thinking about poetry this morning, and you know why. In 2008, it was 7:05 p.m. on a Saturday night, September 27th, 2008. I attended a writers' conference, Judy, and I was looking for an agent. I had written a novel, and I was looking for an agent, and I found one. So I'm all excited. I go to dinner, and when dinner's completed, I say to my buddy, I'm going to go up to my room and work on my novel. I have an agent now. And he said, no, hang around a little bit. This guy could be pretty good. I said, no, I don't want to see a poet. Let me get out of here. Well, I stayed. Thank goodness.
Oh, absolutely. What a great story. Well, let me tell our viewers a little bit about Taylor Mali. He's one of the most well-known poets to have emerged from the poetry slam movement. His poem, What Teachers Make, has been viewed over 4 million times on YouTube. He got his bachelor's degree from Bowdoin College. He went to graduate school at Kansas State. He studied drama at the Royal Shakespeare Company at Oxford. He spent 9 years in the classroom teaching everything from English to math to history. He's performed and lectured for teachers all over the world. He's written a multitude of books, including Bouquet of Red Flags, wonderful read. And Billy Collins says about Taylor, not since Taylor Mali has there been a poet the likes of Taylor Mali. He is pegged as a slam poet, but his work is leavened with charm and wit. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you so much. I'd like to point out that when I wrote to my friend and mentor, Billy Collins, and said, can I get a blurb for my book? Anything that begins with the phrase, not since William Wordsworth. And so that's where he got the idea. He took my advice, but only half of it. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Charlie.
Tell us.
Let me just, before we started, Judy, I wanted to let them know what has happened since that audacious meeting that we had in Tucson, Arizona in 2008. Number one, I put my novel aside and I wrote a book of poetry and found a publisher. Number two, I came back to Laguna Woods and opened up the Spoken Word Club, and I've been hosting it for over 10 years now. I started and launched a literary anthology where we've interviewed at least 3 poet laureates of the United States, and I keep writing poetry and I can't stop. So see what you did, Taylor.
Well, you're welcome, and I apologize.
Tell our viewers, Taylor, about what slam poetry is.
Well, first of all, if anybody would ask the question like that, I would say the guy who invented the poetry slam, Mark Smith, says, don't say slam poetry, because slam poetry makes it sound like it's a different style of poetry. And maybe now it is, but at least back when it started, in the same way that there was no Christianity before Jesus came around, and you know, Jesus was Jewish. In the same way, the poetry slam was a place where you competed with poems, and you'd get up, and there were no strictures about what you could or could not perform, and nobody was going to say that's not poetry. And you perform your poem in front of 5 randomly selected drunk racist idiots who have been given scorecards and the responsibility to judge each poem on its merits, to make sure that the better poets advance and the not so good poets get thanked and told, sorry, but we shouldn't have to listen to anything else you have to say. Ostensibly, the judge is supposed to reserve 5 points for the literary merit of the poem and 5 points for the performance of it, and then mix them together. That's not really what happens, or when I was involved, for the 20 years that I was involved in slam, invariably the performance of the poem had a bigger impact on your score, which is to say a brilliantly performed mediocre poem 9 times out of 10 would beat out the mediocre performance of a brilliant poem.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, that is. Now that's kind of died off now. You used to be on the board, and apparently there's no slam contest nationally or now anymore.
I don't know that there is, but they went through their own kind of reckoning, the way that the country has had several kinds of reckoning, and yeah, I'm the father. I'm the late father to a couple of little kids, so my hands are full, and I don't really know the backstory of what happened. But there is no national poetry slam the way there was.
I was interested in your studying drama. Now, at one time, did you want to become an actor?
I did. Doesn't everybody?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed performing my work. And what's funny is that on the last day, I didn't study with the Royal Shakespeare Company at Oxford. I studied acting at Oxford at a summer program run by Yale University in Oxford, designed to take American actors and have them study with members of the Royal Shakespeare Company. So I studied with a couple of members of the Royal Shakespeare Company in Oxford. Although if you read my bio quickly, I make it sound like I was a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and that's probably by design. But on the last,
Hey, Judy,
Oh,
we're going to try to fit in like 7
Okay.
poems during this entire thing. So we'd like to get a sample up front of Hay Park Avenue. You have it
I
ready?
do. I got it right here. This is a new poem called Hay Park Avenue, unpublished. First time the world is hearing it.
All right.
When you grow up, knowing the greatest gift your father ever gave you was loving your mother, when both of them made baseless claims of never being perfect parents, encouraging you not to become their perfect son, because who would ever want one? There will be a name for you, Park Avenue. When you grow up with so much more than money, as I did, which is to say good food, grass stains, and just the right amount of blood and cuts and plaster casts blessing your precious skin, to speak nothing of girls, even the brilliant, bold, and beautiful. Let me show you what carpe diem means. When girls kissed you back and loved you back and always came to all your games and taught you how to break a heart so it grew back bigger than it was before. When you have a place in which to hide or curse and write or cry, with maybe even stars glowing on the ceiling of the closet at the end of the hall, the one with the perfect stacks of sheets topped with scalloped bars of soap, there will be a name that people call you. Never mind that books were everywhere and singular teachers stood at the ready like midwives of wonder. If you grew up with money, they will have a name for you. Rich boy, Richie Rich, Mr. Moneybags, Park Avenue, Lucky McTrusterson, Bling Jr. the Third. It will sting, but don't cry, because they won't be all wrong, and only you will ever know why.
Now we want to know, is that fiction or is that nonfiction, and why did you write it?
I wrote that because in recent years, I have been leaning into my privilege in a way that early on I thought, I can't let anybody know that I was born on Park Avenue. Hello, I'm competing in a poetry slam. That's not the kind of thing that people want to hear. And I was never able to hide it. So in recent years, I've leaned into it, and I was taking a workshop, and they asked you to sort of delve into your childhood hurt. And I thought, I've never heard anybody complain about having come from privilege. Mm-hmm. And that's not really what I wanted to do either. So I got the premise of the poem, Hay Park Avenue. You know, if you grow up rich, they're gonna make jokes about you. At the poetry slam that I helped run in New York, my friend Kristen, my former second best friend, Kristen O'Keefe Aptowitz, used to love saying, you know, Agdanash said, if you want to know what God thinks about money, look at the people he gave it to. And then people would laugh. And she would say, and Taylor's standing in the back and he's no exception. I made it on a slam team once and she said, you know what? Our slam team had awesome working class roots, but now Taylor's on it and it averages out to like upper middle class.
Taylor, we had dinner outside of the Ugly Mug in Orange where you performed one night, and I'm trying to remember if I picked up the check, because I usually do. I usually grab for the check first.
That's a page out of my playbook too, especially when you're with poets who can't afford it.
That's right. Usually when you're with poets.
How did you handle that when you felt that? Did you feel resentment from some of them, or just?
Of course, but what are you going to do? What are you going to? It's just not. That's what I say in the last stanza. It will sting, but don't cry, because they won't be all wrong, and only you will ever know why. And there's a line in there that said, when you grow up with so much more than money. And that's what I wanted to, people think that I grew up with money, but my parents loved each other. And that was such a great gift. And there were books everywhere. And I had teachers. You think I was lucky because I had money? No, I was lucky for so many other reasons. And how come nobody talks about that? Oh, hey, look at Taylor. His parents are still married.
Yes, you're right. That opening line grabs you right away. When you think about that and you think about your own history, wow.
It's one of my
the greatest gift they could give you is your mother loves your father, and vice versa.
Well, and you went to grad school to become a better poet, from my reading.
That's
and
right.
You really didn't intend to go into teaching, but you, is that right? And
That's
then
right.
you started teaching. Was it your senior in grad school teaching?
At Kansas State, they made everybody in the English department, whether they were getting a degree in rhetoric or in composition or fiction or poetry or nonfiction, you had to teach freshman composition.
That was,
2 semesters. And I found that even though that's not what I went there and I was terrified my first class, and I had students who were older than me. I loved teaching. So whereas many of my friends went off to get PhDs, I went and became a high school and a middle school teacher.
Right.
Taylor, I know you probably don't even want to talk about it, but we're going to play the excerpt, so I want to talk to you about what teachers make. I mean, it's an impossible story that just came about, and I just want to know, are you tired of talking about it? I mean, it's like Frank Sinatra that doesn't want to sing, New York, New York anymore if he was still alive.
Well, that I like to think of David Sedaris, who can divide his life into 2 halves before he read the Santa Land Diaries on National Public Radio and after. He said that just changed everything. So when I wrote What Teachers Make, I was tapping into, again, a resentment, and that scores very high in the poetry slam. How dare you judge me for what I make? Mm-hmm. Teachers make a difference. I'll keep talking about that. That poem has opened up so many doors that you're going to play it right now.
Yes, we're going to play a clip.
And I don't have to listen to it.
And there you go.
Let me just say that the man that's sitting off to the side is Billy Collins, the former U.S. Poet Laureate.
That's right. Let's play the clip.
This poem is called What Teachers Make, or Objection Overruled, or If Things Don't Work Out, You Can Always Go to Law School. He says the problem with teachers is, what's a kid going to learn from someone who decided that his best option in life was to become a teacher? He reminds the other dinner guests that it's true what they say about teachers, those who can do and those who can't teach. I decide to bite my tongue instead of his, and resist the urge to remind the other dinner guests that it's also true what they say about lawyers, because we're eating after all, and this is supposed to be polite conversation. I mean, you're a teacher, Taylor. Come on, be honest. What do you make? And I wish he hadn't done that. Asked me to be honest. Because you see, I have this little policy in my classroom about honesty and ass-kicking, which is if you ask for it, then I have to let you have it. You want to know what I make? I make kids work harder than they ever thought they could. I can make a C+ feel like a Congressional Medal of Honor, and I can make an A- feel like a slap in the face. How dare you waste my time with anything less than your very best? I make kids sit through 40 minutes of study hall in absolute. No, you may not work in groups. No, you cannot ask me a question. Why won't I let you go to the bathroom? Because you're bored and you don't really have to go to the bathroom, do you? I make parents tremble in fear when I call home at around dinner time. Hi, this is Mr. Molly. Hope I haven't called at a bad time. I just wanted to talk to you about something that your son said today in class. To the biggest bully in the grade, he said, leave that kid alone. I still cry sometimes, don't you? And that was the noblest act of courage that I have ever seen. I make parents see their children for who they are and who they can be. You want to know what I make? I make kids wonder. I make them question. I make them criticize. I make them apologize and mean it. I make them write. And then I make them read. I make them spell. Definitely beautiful, definitely beautiful, until they will never misspell either one of those words again. I make them show all their work in math class and then hide it on their final drafts in English. I make them realize that if you've got this, then you follow this. And if somebody ever tries to judge you based on what you make, you give them this. Here, let me break it down for you so you know what I say is true. Teachers make a goddamn difference. Now what about you?
All right, Judy, what else do you want to dive into?
Well, I wanted to know that how, well, I know, but I want Taylor to tell our viewers how from teaching he got into the slam poetry, a poetry slam.
Good.
I have it written down the right way, but I
Young dog just learned a new trick. In graduate school, one of the professors on my master's committee said, have you heard about this thing that they do over in Lawrence, Kansas, once a month? It's a poetry slam, and it seems like it's ideally suited for your talents. And I went, and oh my goodness, I realized this is the perfect marriage of my talents. It takes my graduate school, my drama school training and my poetry and puts them together. So it was in graduate school, probably 92. Slam was invented on July 25th, 1986. Charlie seems to be a man of dates. That was the very first poetry slam in Chicago. And they hadn't really developed all the rules yet, but it was a couple more years. And in 1990 was the very first National Poetry Slam Championships. It was in October in the Bay Area. Had I not gone to graduate school in Kansas, I likely would have discovered the Poetry Slam 2 years earlier. And now I wouldn't have a master's degree in English literature. I went to Kansas. It took me 3 years later to discover the slam. And then I was integral. I loved it. That was part of my life, running slams and judging them and thinking slam and thinking how to perform. But for a while, I was a teacher at the same time.
Right. And wasn't that a big step to decide to finally leave teaching? And you went to the headmaster and told him you were going to leave teaching for poetry. And what was his reaction?
He said, although he denies it later, he said, well, if it doesn't work out, you can come back and get your job after next year. Oh, and I said, oh, that's so great. And then I went back to him later and I said, it really meant a lot to me that you said I could have my old job back if the poetry didn't work out. And he said, I didn't say that. I don't think I'm even legally allowed to do that, but that's exactly what he said. Because of the circumstances of my upbringing, I knew that I wasn't going to starve. I had this massive safety net. I think I told myself, and this is a little awkward for somebody whose most well-known poem is "What Teachers Make. How dare you judge me for what I make?" I think I told myself, if I can make as much money as a poet as I did as a teacher, then I'll give it another year. And that worked out.
What I want to talk about is, and after you read the next poem, I want to hear Frank McCourt and Billy Collins next. The difference between when you're writing for the print and when you're writing for the spoken word. We'll talk about that after you read our next selection.
Do you want to tell our viewers who Frank McCourt is for anybody that doesn't know, Taylor?
Frank McCourt is a wonderful Irish American writer who wrote Angela's Ashes and Teacher Man and such a wonderful raconteur. And
yes,
apparently his teaching style would just be he was telling stories, which is a lot of it, a lot of it. Yeah. And he was a teacher at the Southampton Writers Conference. When I went and studied with Billy Collins, Frank McCourt was next door. Occasionally, Billy would say, "There is far too much laughter coming from Frank McCourt's memoir class." And he went over there and he busted it. He was like, "Hey, some of us are trying to do real writing.
Serious work here.
Serious work. Cut the laughter." Anyway,
let's hear it.
One morning, Billy related a story of what had happened at the cocktail party for the writers only, for the teachers only. They had a cocktail party. And Billy Collins and Frank McCourt got on very well. And so this is basically, I don't even think Billy knows this poem, but this is a straight transcription of what he told me, essentially. It's called Frank McCourt Joins Billy Collins on the Patio at Sunset. The two of them, the one with whiskey, a chilled white wine for the other, watch as the sun dips into Long Island Sound. "It's a beautiful sunset," says Frank in his brogue, to which Billy replies, "Back off, McCourt. The sunset is my territory, and the sunrise. You stick to your miserable Irish childhood and leave us poets the sun and the moon, which rises even now as I call its name."
That sounds a lot like Billy himself. And as a matter of fact, I think, he has a daily show, and I watch it, this broadcast, Monday through Fridays. And I think he's drinking a little brown stuff now, let me tell you.
I don't know what he was drinking, but I do know that Frank was having the whiskey.
Well, so let's talk about the style of spoken word poetry and written poetry.
To me, there's not that much difference, and that's why I always correct people when they say, "What's the what's?" Because if you say slam poetry, it makes it sound like it's a different style of poetry. As I said, it maybe is now. But when most people say slam poetry, what they mean is loud, well-performed, spoken fast, possibly influenced by hip-hop with lots of rhyme and and it's got a certain rhythm to it. Did you watch Amanda Gorman recite her poem at the inauguration?
It was a performance.
It was a performance, and it was she was performing. You could see her hand gestures. That's a slam poet. That is a slam poet.
You know what's funny about that? I'll interrupt you 1 second. On Billy's show one day, he didn't criticize her in any way, but he held up the sheet of paper that had the manuscript of the poem on it, and it was all marked up in red. He said, "I can't help it, the professor in me." Now, he's so funny. I laugh at everything he says. But go on.
Let me just say one thing about in preparation. Billy Collins and I were the first pairing of a series that I run at the Bowery Poetry Club called Page Meets Stage. That's where that recording is that you played of What Teachers Make. In anticipation of that, I went to Billy's house in New York, in Dutchess County or wherever. And I asked him, "How do you prepare for your readings?" And he said, "I don't. One reading is preparation for the next, because the text exists exists here in the book.
Right.
How I read it on any given night is almost incidental. And that's when I knew that there was a reason for this series, because a performance poet would say, no. The poem exists here in the night that I am speaking it, and how it looks on the page is what's incidental.
Ah, okay.
So if you wanted the difference, I write spoken word, I write for the ear, I write poetry with the intent that the first time it is ever experienced, it's going to be heard before it is ever read. I know that Billy Collins writes for his ideal reader is female and is sitting quietly and reading to herself while drinking tea. Mm-hmm. I write for the average literate drunk, and I mean, so I use humor. Billy Collins uses humor a lot.
Absolutely.
Humor, laughter is an indication of understanding. So when you tell a joke, people don't laugh at something they don't understand unless it's nervous laughter because they don't understand.
Right.
So I'm always mixing. I'm never saying, oh, this is a poem I'm going to be performing, so I'm going to put this type of hat on and write it in a certain way.
There are just certain words, though, when it's on the page that, there's double meanings for words and things. So sometimes when you're writing and it's going to be spoken, that you would choose maybe a different word than one that has double meanings.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I can't, but I went to the Ugly Mug one night, and there was a young boy, he must have been a freshman college student, and he was writing, and he read one of his poems, and I went over to him after, and I said, did you realize you were going to be doing this verbally and that it was spoken word? He said, yes, of course, everything I write, I know if it's going to be spoken or on the page. So he was very aware of how his writing would be used. Mm. Yeah.
See, what I find fascinating is that because so many spoken word poets are writing for the performance, when it comes to putting the poem down on paper, they don't know where to break a line.
Right.
Good sense of what a line looks like, because a line doesn't really have any use. And if you overemphasize where your line break is while you're reading, it never works out well.
No.
Why don't we read the next two in a row that you're going to do? It's and you can introduce them any way you'd like. That's you in the arms of your Nana, and when the answer to every question is yes.
And these are your two new poems.
These are also two new poems. I wrote them during the pandemic. I had an old friend who died not of COVID. In her mid 80s, she was just going steadily downhill, and COVID did her no favors. And for the last month, or for the last 6 months, she just lost her ability to speak. And so that's a common experience to a lot of people. They watch their parents or older loved ones. And so I wrote this poem called "When the Answer to Every Question is Yes." Too often comes a time when those we love have lived past the power to answer more than yes or no in response to any question. And so we simply change the questions from "How are you feeling today?" to "Would you like a little more water?" And if we forget and accidentally ask something more complicated like "Where does it hurt today?" they may look at us, smile, and say yes or no, to remind us that's all they can manage, or else by then it always hurts everywhere. And even beyond this time, there is another, when half of what little they still have is taken too, and the answer to every question must be yes, as in, do you know how much I love you? Would you like me to read you another poem? Or shall I come visit you again soon? Or, as it is for some, and this is somehow worse to me, the answer must always be no, for they remember only how to refuse and deny, which seems a greater curse. Even so, the questions can change again to become, for example, are you done with this water? Aren't you tired of me reading all these poems? No? Well, then I guess I could stay for another hour. Lastly comes the time when there are no answers, only listening and the holding of hands, which is a part of prayer. And lastly, only breathing, only air.
Wow.
Luckily, most people get to a point where they can't say yes or no. They can only say yes. But if, depending on your life, I knew of one elderly woman who all she could say is no, 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 I don't want that. And that just seems so much worse to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the stanza about, would you like to hear more poetry? Well, then I can stay another hour.
Yeah.
That's what, at the end, that was, when they can't ask you questions or respond, the best thing that you could do is bring poems. My last big book, it was called Late Father and Other Poems, about becoming a father relatively late in life for me. I'm a little older than I look. And also poems about my own late father. And the last poem is called Late Father, and it takes about 13 minutes to recite. So I never get to read it at readings. I'm not going to read it here. It's way too long. And so I just read it to her.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think I'm going to like that, You in the Arms of Your Nana, because I had a Nana. I know some people have grandmoms and moms and everything, but I loved my Nana.
Now, for you, was that your grandmother?
Yes.
Did you ever cross paths with a great grandmother?
No.
It's not uncommon, but it's rare. It's rare. And if you do, it's, if your mom got married, let's say your mom got married at 22, then she's gonna, let's say your mom had you at 22, that means, and you do too, so she becomes a grandmother at 44, and she becomes a great grandmother at 66, and that might be going a little bit early, but 25, 25, 25, you're a great grandmother at 75.
Right.
It could happen.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Judy, did you ever meet any of your great grandparents?
I didn't, and of course, I regret not asking my grandparents more questions. Oh dear! And you're so into geology, and what now? You're a 14th generation New Yorker, or 12th?
I think I'm 13th, and the 14th generation of my family to be raised in New Amsterdam or New York, and my children are the 14th. And I'm looking at my family chart on the wall, which is I can't show you, but I'm fascinated by the relentless arithmetic of genealogy. Everybody has 2 parents, everybody has 4 grandparents, but there are a lot of people who aren't quite clear about the fact that you have 8 great grandparents.
Yes.
And then it keeps doubling. It just keeps doubling every time you go back. 9 generations back, there were 512 people whose DNA you now carry.
This is fascinating. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Yeah. So when somebody says, my great grandfather was the blah blah blah, you say, well, let me use myself as an example. I sometimes like to brag that my great-great-grandfather was named John Taylor Johnston. That's where I get my name. And he was the founder of the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Wow.
And he was a big philanthropist and a railroad baron. And so if I were to brag and say, oh, yeah, my great-great-grandfather, one of my great-great-grandparents was the founder of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A smart person would say, what about the other 15? You have 16 great grandparents, and and one of them was special to you. What about the other 15?
Yeah, fascinating.
Exactly. So tell us about Nana.
So this is if you ever did get to meet one of your great grandparents, it was, or a great great grandmother. Whenever I read this poem, people come up and say, "I did. I overlapped my great great grandmother for 3 weeks." It's always you're a baby, and maybe there's a
Right.
picture, of an
Yeah,
elderly.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So I wrote this poem because in doing all of my genealogical study, I realized, oh, that person. Wait, they died at age 32.
Yeah.
And you can't help but think, well, thank goodness they had the person who
It's my
became
great
my,
great 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 great
thank
grandfather
goodness I had
first.
a chance. And after the grandmother who became,
Yeah.
my ancestor was
Right.
born. Okay. I'm sorry you died in the factory, but okay, that's you in the arms of your nana. We tend to think of all our ancestors, all those who lived and died before us, as being really old, just because the tiny few we actually do ever meet always are, or else become so. Our parents and theirs, perhaps a few great grands if you're lucky, and maybe one great great grandmother, back when you were just a newborn baby, just before she died, on one of her good days. There's an old photograph around here somewhere, isn't there? So spare a thought today for those who lived, those who never lived to be the age that you are now. All those mothers who died in childbirth and fathers struck down in accidents at work, to say nothing of the untold inflammations and mysterious frailties of the past. Raise a glass to all those who lived and died and never got to know their children as they grew, who never even got to be as old as you.
Oh,
That's
wow.
that's what it's really about. Now that I remind myself,
Yeah.
is that we don't often, I don't know, and I haven't figured out how to figure this out, what the median age of your family is. Like,
Oh,
like you have probably, we all have probably are now on the older side of our ancestors, depending on how far you go back 1,000 years. People died when they were in their 40s, right? Or if they were lucky.
Hmm.
But there's so many of your ancestors. We tend to think of all of our great great grandparents
Right.
as like, if I could see them today, I'm your great great grandfather.
65, you were in a rocking chair and you didn't move.
Yeah, but how many of them, like, I'm your great great grandfather. I died of influenza at age 41. I never got to be. What's it like to be your age, Taylor?
Right.
Well,
right.
I'm 50. I'm 55 now. How many people in my family tree never even got to be this old?
Yes, yes. Isn't that the truth?
We think, and you never asked your grandparents questions, Judy. So
No.
you never, maybe there were pictures around, and maybe your grandmother said, "Oh, I was quite the looker in my day." And you can look at the pictures of her and say, "Well, beauty standards have changed." But yeah, no, I see it, Grandma. But you never think of her grandmother
No,
as a young woman.
I know.
No, you never do. Let's talk about the younger generation. Let's talk about girls probably in seventh or eighth grade. And when I read your poem, Girls Lending Pens, I mean, it took me back. That happened to me for real. A little blonde girl with, with hair, little bangs. And I want to, we want to play that clip because I think it's one of the funniest poems I've ever heard.
One
And
of my favorites of it. Yes.
I tried to put it into this program twice. I liked it so much, but Taylor caught that.
Well, keep in mind as you play, I don't know what version you're going to play, but keep in mind that this is probably the oldest poem of mine that I still regularly perform today. I wrote this poem in 1980 when I was in 10th grade. That makes it 41 years old today.
Wow.
And
Also,
also,
you were in 10th grade?
I did. And there's only one line that I changed. And I can tell you about it after you hear it.
All right.
And
Let's play that clip right now then,
okay,
David.
go ahead. On girls lending pens. Pens.
Pens.
And this is actually odd because you asked me to borrow my pen several times right before the show. So this is not about that. On girls lending pens. I walked into the classroom and straight to my chair, but when I reached for my pen, it wasn't there. I had no pen, or crayon, or pencil. I was stuck before class without a writing utensil. I could have asked the teacher if I had dared, but I knew she would have said, "You're unprepared." So to be diplomatic and avoid the fight, I quickly turned to the girl on my right. "Do you possibly have a pen I could borrow? I'll use it today, have it back by tomorrow." "Oh, for sure," she said. "I've got plenty." And she turned around with a handful of 20. "I really don't care what color or style. I'll take that fountain pen," I said with a smile. "Oh, you don't want that one. It comes out all ugly. Plus, it's made of pure gold," she said to me smugly. "Then how about the blue?" "No, that one hops." "Okay, maybe the green? Comes out in glops." "Black? I'm afraid it's having trouble connecting." "Red? Oh, I need that if we do any in-class correcting." "Look," I said, my voice filling with fear, "just give me a pen before the teacher gets here." "But this one always comes out in tons, and the yellow one skips, and the purple one runs. When the brown one dries, it looks real icky, and the orange one's covered with something sticky. This one's for emergencies, in case I get confused, because it's clean and it's fresh and it's never been used. I keep this one for quizzes, because it brings good luck, and the ballpoint's splotchy, and the cap is stuck, and this one's empty with the silver band, and the felt tip will leak all over your hand, and this one's cracked, and that's going berserk, and this one will be perfect, except it doesn't work. But here, take this one's fine. Oh, no, wait, sorry, that one's mine." I think she went on, but I couldn't have cared. I decided it was better to go unprepared.
So what's the line you changed?
Well, first of all, I went to an all-boys school. So unlike you, I did not know what it was like to try to borrow a pen from a girl. I just made her female because the way the story was related to me at summer camp, this guy said, "Oh, don't you hate when you try to borrow a pen from a girl and she's got 99 pens, but 98 reasons why you can't use them?" And I was sitting there going, no, I've never had girls in my class, but this is going to make a great poem, you know.
So that's secondhand, but someone told you that story, because it really happens in life. I mean,
it does.
You went to an all-boys school, you don't have that experience. Judy, did you ever loan a pen to a boy?
Not that I recall, but
Yeah, you kept all of them too. You wouldn't let them go.
well, I was going to let them use it. Taylor, I'm interested in your process of writing. Do you go to your office every day, or how does it work?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm lucky enough that we can devote one room in our house, in our apartment here in Brooklyn, entirely to being my office. Entirely. It's also the overflow guest room. We have a guest room for when Grandma and Grandpa come to visit. The kids have their own room, and we have got our master room. This is my office. If we happen to have 3 guests, then the pull-out couch in my office becomes the overflow guest room. I recently gave away a lot of my books. I did a complete Marie Kondo on my bookshelf and only kept the ones that spark joy, of course. I write a lot by hand. I have lots of little moleskin journals. I can't remember where they all went now. So often the first draft is by hand. Sometimes it is a letter. I write with my, I have a Meisterstruck 149 Mont Blanc, which I absolutely love. That's my signing pen too. It slows down the process. Sometimes I sign a book and then have to.
Oh, yes.
But I write a lot longhand. I write in cursive. And there's something about the scratch of the, oops, I just saw a car accident out on the streets of here. Something about writing by hand that I love. That said, I'm not addicted to it, and I will very quickly open up a file and type a poem out, and I've got this weird system of trying to track, okay, this poem has been submitted, this poem has not. I always print it out and read it out loud, because to a spoken word poet, the act of reading out loud is is part of the editing process. You get clues in the reception of the poem that make you realize, okay, that's not going over. Nobody's understanding that.
Right.
But that's how it works. There's no one way. Somerset Maugham was asked once, do you write only when you're inspired, or do you write at a certain time every day?
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, I write only when I'm inspired. Luckily, I'm inspired every day from 7:45 to 1:30 in the afternoon. I love that idea that if you make a habit of showing up every day at the same time, your muse will learn when she's supposed to appear.
So you do that? You do go in your office every day and sit there?
I do go in my office every day, and I try to write something before looking at my email.
Oh, good for you. Because you can get lost in those emails.
Oh, you sure can. By, important things too. Like I need to work on my Amazon subscription, to make sure that those air filters don't arrive too early.
Now,
you need another extended warranty on your car for sure. There's a poem.
What do you say, Taylor, to people that say, "Oh, I don't like poetry"?
Well,
which I think is rather common.
It is rather common, but that just means that they haven't heard enough poetry for to find the kind that they like. Kevin Young, who's the editor of poetry editor at the New Yorker, he made a good point. He said, nobody says, I don't like music.
No.
Everybody's much more aware of the thousands of different kinds of music. Like, oh, this is what I like. And people just aren't used to realizing, oh, there's lots of different kinds of poetry.
Yeah.
You just haven't found the one you like.
Taylor, one of the things I really liked about you when I saw you at that writers conference, all the mucky mucks and the people that run it and everything, they all go to have lunch by themselves. They go corner themselves somewhere. You sat in the audience that day. It was a luncheon. The second time you read was a luncheon. And a guy sat next to you named Terry McCarthy, and he didn't like poetry. You sat there on the spot and wrote a poem to change his mind. And let me tell you something, You really did. He was a celebrity in Tucson for the next 5 years because I published that in the Hummingbird Review, and he was so thrilled. So there's at least 2 of us from that one session that really got turned on to poetry after hearing you.
Well, one of the compliments that I love hearing most is people coming up going, I didn't think that I liked poetry, but I loved what you did. And often they'll say, therefore, what you did must not be poetry. That's not poetry. Because I liked what you did, and I already know that I don't like poetry. And I'm not willing to go back and admit that my definition of poetry was too narrow. Right. Ergo, you must not be a poet.
While we're talking about writing, Judy, I think this is the right time to start talking about these dice. I have these dice. I bought these. I saw that online somewhere. Taylor Molly was selling dice that help you write poetry. Can you explain what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Metaphor Dice Project. Yeah.
They're called Metaphor Dice, and they're based on the understanding that a metaphor is nothing more than an equation between a big thing, like, let's not use that one, power, hope, beauty. Can you see these?
Yes.
Passion. What is passion? You equate a big thing to a small thing. A thunderstorm, a wonder. Passion is a wasteland. Passion is a quiz. What kind? And then you introduce the white, which are the adjectives. You roll them, you arrange them red, white, and blue, and you get power is a reluctant quiz. Who has not failed the reluctant quiz of power? What is time? Time is a vacant wasteland, the vacant wasteland of time. It all started when I was teaching a poetry class, and there was this girl who said, I don't know what to write about. I said, well, you just, I put these words up on the board, and she chose my father, broken mirror. And I said, yeah, see, if you were to say, my father is a broken mirror, nobody would think you meant that literally. That's a metaphor. And then your job in the rest of the poem is to explain why that's true. I left her for 5 minutes and came back, and she had written this. My father is a broken mirror, which is to say he's been shattered into 1,000 pieces. He's hard to handle without cutting yourself. My mother says he's 7 years of bad luck. But even in the smallest jagged pieces, I can still recognize my own reflection.
Wow.
Then I realized I've got to make this a game. I've got to box this somehow so that she can get to that point without me having to write 60 words on the board and explain the whole thing. So that's where Metaphor Dice, they're available on Amazon and metaphordice.com.
And you were rolling the original version, which were real dice, and these are made out of cardboard that you just pluck them out.
Yeah, the paper one. Oh, I'm glad you have those. I'm glad you have those. The original dice that I made were paper.
Oh, okay.
But it took 45 minutes for kids to cut them out and assemble them with tape. So I have this, I discovered what's called a die cut.
Right.
And my printer made a die cut, so you can just pop these out. And then I invented this design so that they'll fold together without tape. So you've got some of my favorite words on one side, but then you can fold it in on itself.
Oh,
and
write your own.
The backside is blank, so you can create your own words, which was really one of the best parts. My students loved coming up with metaphors where they get to choose the words. When we went with the acrylic dice, I had to. They're beautiful. They're engraved. They're expensive though. Whereas you know, a sheet like this, I can send a set of 30 to a class for $20, and it's a little.
My spoken word club, the spoken word club of Laguna Woods, is going to get a whole set as soon as we're allowed to meet again, because I did buy a packet of them.
Oh, good. Well, roll what you got. Roll what you got, and tell me what it says. Red, white, blue. I'll try to come up with a.
My birth was an expensive animal.
My birth was an expensive animal. My mother always talks about the expensive animal that was my birth. My father, not so much. My father had the devices for. My father had to pay for the expensive animal that was my birth. I'm not getting anywhere, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot.
Yeah. Thank you for trying.
Something.
We're going to play the impotence of proofreading at some point. And is that a real experience you've ever had with a student?
No, that's me. And also, be sure to get the title right. It is not called The Impotence of Proofreading. It is technically called The Impotence of Proofreading.
Yes.
That comes from, I mean, we've all, if you've been a teacher, you know what it's like to get a paper from a student who mistakenly believes that running spell check on their paper is sufficient. And nowadays, spell check will catch two words. If you, it would catch it. It didn't, the first versions of spell check would not.
Right.
In fact, the first versions of spell check didn't have that grammar checker. Now I'm typing something, and if it's if it's misspelled, it gets underlined in red. But if it's weird grammar-wise, it gets underlined in blue. And that happened. Everybody has their favorites. One of mine was one of the all-time favorites is Magellan was a great explorer. Magellan circumcised the world with a 100-foot clipper. He circumcised the world in a 100-foot clipper. The one that I actually got on one of the papers that one of my students wrote was this kid said, over Christmas break, my family and I visited Tibet, and we walked around a Buddhist temple. And as we walked around the Buddhist temple, the smell of incest just hung in the air. Incest, it was a very sweet smelling incest.
Oh, that's marvelous. Judy, you're not going to believe this. It's time to wrap this show up, dear.
Goodness. Oh, we didn't even talk about his taking the plastic bags out of the trees. The article recently in the
New York Times article. We'll show that. We'll be able to put up a shot of that. Yeah, from the New York.
It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. Are you going to play what the impotence of proofreading as an outro?
Yes. Yep.
All right.
And then Judy's going to say one thing. Go ahead, Judy.
Yes, I have a quote here that by Horace. The aim of the poet is to inform or delight or to combine together in what he says both pleasure and applicability to life.
And I have poetry, the best words in the best order, and that's Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So we have, of course, that's pretty good about any type of writing, right? Put the right word in the right order,
Right,
in the best order.
Yes.
Well, Judy, we're going to say goodbye. Thanks for watching today. Take care.
Taylor, it's been just a delight. See you soon.
I'm Charlie Ridner. Bye now.
This is called the impotence of proofreading. Has this ever happened to you? You work very, very hard on a paper for English class and still get a very low grade on it, like a D or even a D equals. And all because you are the liverwurst spoiler in the whale wide word. Yes, proofreading your peppers is a matter of the utmost impotence. Now, this is a problem that affects manly students all over the world. I myself was such a bed spiller once upon a term that my English torturer in my sophomoric year, Mrs. Myth, she said that I was never going to get into a good colleague. And that's all I wanted. That's all any kid wants at that age, just to get into a good colleague. And not just anal community colleague either, because I am not the kind of guy who would be happy at just anal community colleague. I need to be challenged. Challenged menstrually. I need a place that can offer me intellectual simulation. So I know this probably makes me sound like a stereo, but I really felt that I could get into an ivory legal colleague. So if I did not improvement, then gone would be my dream of going to Harvard, jail, or prison. You know, in prison, New Jersey. So I got myself a spell checker, and I figured I was on Sleazy Street. But there are several missed aches that a spell checker can't catch. For instance, if you accidentally leave out word, your spell checker won't put it in you. And God, for billing purposes only, you should have serial problems with Tory spelling. Your spell check-off may end up using a word that you had absolutely no detention of using, because, I mean, what do you want it to douche, you know? No, it only does what you tell it to douche. You're the one who's sitting in front of the computer screen with your hand on the mouth going, clit, clit, clit. Just goes to show you how embargo one careless little clit of the mouth can be, which reminds me of this one time. During my junior mint, the teacher took the paper that I had written on a sale of two titties. And I am serial. She read it out loud in front of all of my assmates. It was quite possibly one of the most humidifying experiences I have ever had, being laughed at like that pubically. So do yourself a flavor and follow these two Pisces of advice. 1, there is no prostitute for careful editing of your own work. No prostitute whatsoever. And 3, when it comes to proofreading, the red penis, your friend. Spank you.